I've been thinking a lot lately about ending things with my girlfriend, and I know right away that this is probably going to make me sound like a terrible person. I'm fully aware I'm opening myself up to a lot of judgment, and I'll likely get a lot of backlash for saying this, but I really want to hear from everyone, get all kinds of perspectives on it. Just a heads up though, this is going to be a pretty long post because there's a lot I need to say, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest. A little over a year ago, my girlfriend went through a horrific experience. While leaving work one evening, she was attacked. It was a terrifying ordeal. Thankfully, she wasn't seriously hurt, though her attacker did threaten her with a weapon. I can't even imagine the kind of fear she must have felt in that moment. But on the positive side, the store where she worked had security cameras, and the bank across the street had caught footage of the attacker's car. With this evidence, the police managed to track him down within a day. He didn't even try to fight the charges. He pled guilty, hoping to avoid the maximum sentence. The judge gave him 20 years, though with good behavior, he could be out in about 10 years. I want to make it clear that the man who harmed her is no longer a threat. She doesn't have to fear him coming after her, at least not for the next decade. Still, the trauma she endured has left deep scars. While I wasn't the direct victim, this experience shook me to my core. I struggled with feelings of depression and helplessness. Watching someone I love go through such a traumatic event, and feeling powerless to protect her, it was almost more than I could handle. Right after the attack, she didn't want to see me, which I completely understood, even though it hurt. Her parents took her home from the hospital, and I didn't hear from her for a week. I didn't even get a simple text to let me know she was okay. Eventually, after a week, her sister called to tell me that my girlfriend was staying with her parents and would contact me soon. But instead of her reaching out, her sister asked me to come over. When I arrived, her mum met me at the door and, very coldly, started instructing me on how to behave, what to say, and even that I shouldn't try to hug her or make any physical contact. I knew it was all part of the recovery process. They were probably getting advice from therapists on how to handle everything, and I tried my best to go along with it. When I stepped inside, I saw my girlfriend sitting in a chair, her dad standing beside her, and her sister on the couch. Her sister spoke on her behalf, saying that my girlfriend was okay, but had been through something traumatic and needed space to recover. My girlfriend didn't say a word to me and barely looked up. I understood why, but the whole thing was just so awkward. After that, I went home, feeling helpless, and started researching how to support a partner who had been through such an ordeal. She began therapy, first twice a week, then once a week after a couple of months. Eventually, she reached out to me and suggested we meet at a coffee shop. By the time I got there, she was already waiting. But she wasn't herself. She had been heavily medicated and seemed distant, almost like a shell of the person I once knew. She told me that she couldn't be with me for a while, that she was working through some personal issues. I understood, and I reassured her that I'd be there for her, no matter what, whether she needed space or support. I started to tell her I loved her, but she stopped me. She told me she wasn't ready to hear that, and that I needed to respect her wishes. It was painful and surprising, but I agreed. The next day, she started texting me. Nothing too significant, just small conversations, but it felt like a small step forward. This continued for about a month and a half. Finally, I asked her if we could meet for dinner. She didn't respond for a couple of days, and when she did, she said she needed to talk to her therapist first. Eventually, she agreed, but set the date for a month later. By then, nearly 4 months had passed since the attack. We'd had one real conversation, and the rest of the time it felt like I was speaking to a stranger. I need to mention, no one, neither her family nor she, kept me updated on her progress. I wasn't entitled to know, but a simple text or call would have meant a lot. Anyway, we met for dinner at a little bistro we used to frequent. I got there early and waited for her. After half an hour, I texted to ask where she was. She replied with, "On my way." When she finally arrived, I asked how she was doing, but she snapped at me, telling me not to ask personal questions. We ate, and afterward I wanted to sit and talk, but she said she was ready to go home. I tried to get her to stay for just a little longer, but I could see the anxiety building in her. I didn't want to push her, so I just told her that I loved her and missed her. She walked away without saying a word. The next day, she was texting me again as if nothing had happened, and over the next few weeks, we began meeting for lunch once a week. Slowly, she started to feel more comfortable being out in public again, and we were able to talk for longer periods. It was a small improvement, but it felt like progress. She had started a new job, and she would tell me about it every day. For the next few months, I watched as she settled in, and while I was happy for her, I couldn't shake the feeling of being incredibly lonely. We hadn't even held hands in all that time. Then, one day, she didn't show up for our lunch. I texted her, but got no reply. I called her parents, hoping they knew where she was, just wanting to make sure she was okay, but they gave me the runaround. I didn't care where she was, I just needed to know she was all right. Finally, her mum told me she was fine, but that I shouldn't expect to hear from her for a while. That worried me, and I started to think that maybe she'd had a relapse and was back in the hospital. But there wasn't much I could do, so I went home and tried to distract myself. 2 weeks went by with no word from her. I kept trying to keep my cool, but eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I called her sister, asking if she was still alive. I could tell her sister knew I was frustrated, and she apologized before explaining that her sister had specifically told them not to let me talk to her. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was losing my mind. I hadn't pushed her for anything, never tried to rush her into anything. All I wanted was to talk to her, have a real conversation. But now I felt like I was being shut out completely. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from her asking me to meet her at an address I didn't recognize. I looked it up, and it was a therapist's office. She asked me to be there at 4, so I had to leave work early to make it. When I checked in at the front desk, I was told the therapist wanted to speak to me alone. I went in, and now I understood what her parents had been talking about. After greeting me, the therapist gave me a list of do's and don'ts, before telling me my girlfriend had something to say to me. I was nervous, confused, and hurt all at once. When I went in to see her, she was sitting across from me with a box of tissues. She'd clearly been crying. The therapist explained that my girlfriend wanted to talk in a safe space, so here we were. Then she told me why she hadn't shown up for lunch that day. She had been with another guy from her new job, and they had been intimate. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like someone had taken a knife and stabbed me in the heart. I dropped my head, and tears just started falling. The therapist then chimed in, explaining that my girlfriend was reclaiming her sexuality after the attack, and that this wasn't cheating in the traditional sense. My girlfriend kept saying she didn't want to lose me, that it was a one-time thing. But honestly, it all sounded like empty words to me. I was overwhelmed with emotion and anger. I felt so trapped, like I was being ganged up on. I didn't know how to express how hurt I was without making things worse. Finally, I blurted out, "You haven't even held my hand in the past 6 months, and yet you go and sleep with some guy from work while I've been sitting here like an idiot waiting for you." She broke down, and the therapist asked me to leave. I was furious, but I apologized for the tone of my voice, explaining that I never wanted to force her into anything. But I also made it clear. I felt like I'd been kept at arm's length. I felt like I'd been cheated on, no matter what they called it. She had been with someone else, and I felt like I'd done everything I could to support her. Later that day, she texted me. Now, she was all chatty, saying this was the worst mistake of her life, and begging me to talk to her. I agreed to meet her, but I was clear from the start. If we were going to move forward, she had to cut this guy out of her life completely. She told me that wasn't possible because they worked together, and I told her if that was the case, I wasn't even going to consider it. She ended up quitting her job, and we started meeting for lunch again. But after a while, I told her I was getting tired of just lunch, so she agreed to come over and watch TV with me. We did that a couple of times, but then one night, while we were watching a movie, I tried to kiss her. Nothing more, just a kiss. She pulled away like I was some kind of threat, saying she wasn't ready. At that point, I snapped. I told her, "It's been over a year, and I haven't tried anything with you. I've been patient, but you went and slept with someone else months ago, and I'm still here, waiting for you to hold my hand." She started crying, and for once I didn't rush to apologize. I did apologize for the way I spoke, but I told her the truth. I felt like I had been kept on the outside, like I was being punished for something I didn't do. I told her I needed space to figure things out and didn't want to hear from her until I knew what I was going to do. It felt unfair to her, but I had been patient for so long, and we were still nowhere near where we needed to be. The truth is, I'm just tired. I understood giving her space right after the attack, and even months later, but it's been over a year. We haven't even held hands. Meanwhile, she's been with someone else. That's what's slowly eating me up inside. I told her I would think things through, but honestly, tonight, I think I'm done. I love her, but I can't keep feeling like this. I hate that she's been through what she has, but staying with her feels like it's only hurting me. I don't know what to do, and I feel like no matter what, I'm going to be left with regret either way.